we'll go on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Duncan Bremner, and he has over 30 years in the semiconductor industry and has held operational and strategic executive roles in product development and technology planning within leading organizations such as National Semiconductor and the Intel Corporation. Originally trained and recognized as an accomplished analog design engineer, he has held both project management and customer-facing roles before establishing Intel's High-Speed Development Center for Global Communication Products. While at Intel, he was a member of their CTO office for communications products to developing product roadmaps before being invited to define and lead a $15 million program to develop ultra-wideband 10 gigahertz wireless technology for ITI Tech Media. Duncan has been very active in promoting change and improvements to engineering education, and is a senior lecturer teaching several electronics courses to students both in Glasgow and in Tundu in cooperation with the University of Electronics Science and Technology. As a senior member of staff, he also has been the program director for 2 of the programs in the TNE partnership. He holds a BSc in Electrical Electronic Engineering from the University of Edinburgh and a PhD MBA from the University of Glasgow. He is cited as an inventor on 17 patents. Now I'll hand it over to you now, Dr.
Great,
Duncan.
thanks very much. Let me just do the battle with the technology as usual. If I try and do that, and then I click on that.
We can see it, yeah.
That's it.
There we go. Yes.
There we go. If you don't do PowerPoint in the right order in Zoom, it gets over it. So, good afternoon, folks. As you can tell, I'm a slightly different academic from most. I've spent most of my life in industry, and I came into teaching probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I've been closely involved with teaching in TNE in Chengdu, teaching engineers. And one of the areas that we've been looking at quite carefully is assessment. This presentation here is kind of a follow-on from some work I did previously about using multiple choice questions for doing for use with TNE students, in particular ones whose first language is not English. And this is a follow-on. You can find that other paper, I think it's on my website at Glasgow, and it's also at the IEEE TAIL conference about 2 years ago. So if you're interested in why you should use multiple choice for non-native speaking English students, have a look at that. This particular talk is about Pairwise, and the reason that we looked at Pairwise, which I'll go into a little later, is that we have large student cohorts. They're all pretty much over 200 students. And the reason for multiple choice questions is that they're very simple to deliver via, we use Moodle, and they're very quick to give feedback to students. You can effectively give instantaneous feedback to students via the Moodle quiz features. And it improves or it removes the language proficiency bias for TNE students, because most people gain the transmittive skills, i.e. talking and writing, after they've gained the receptive skills, which is listening and reading. So it tries to balance out and get better measure of how good the students are actually know the subject rather than how good their English is. Problem with MCQs is they're really difficult to write and very time consuming. It's also quite difficult to personalize exams for each student. And there is a perception, one which hopefully my other paper but justifies, is that you can only test layer 1 and 2 of Bloom's taxonomy, which I don't agree with. It's actually, you can get up to about layer 4 in Bloom's taxonomy. The top 2 layers still need to be old-fashioned written essay type work example type questions. So the purpose really is, the previous looked at can we test higher skills, but this work looks at does pairwise multiple choice questions improve or discriminate in student assessments over standard MCQs. So pairwise MCQs, let me first give an example of a standard MCQ. You have got 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance of getting the right answer on a standard multiple choice question. An average student of just guessing in a 1 in 4 has got a 25% chance of getting the right answer. 1 in 5, you reduce that to a 20% chance, but it still is significant. However, an alternative method is to introduce pairwise questions. So an example might be, does or is red the lowest frequency light in a rainbow spectrum? And the opposite question to that, which you might ask as a pair, would be, which color in a rainbow is the lower frequency light? It's the same question that is flipped, but the student now has to only 1 in 5, 25 chance of guessing both questions correctly. The way we score that is that if question A is correct, you get 2 marks, and if question B is correct, you get 2 marks. But if the students get both questions correct, we give them one bonus mark. In other words, it's 5 marks for the pair that's correct. The way we did the method, I use a lab I take a lab session over, and we use an MCQ quiz. And I'll be quite candid. The reason we give an MCQ quiz heading up for the exams is to kind of force them to open the textbooks and the notes to do some revision in time for their exam. We are interested in their knowledge, but it's really as a method of kickstarting them into the revision process. Within a 25 question quiz for this this experiment, I designed 5 questions that were pairwise questions. The reason was that it was a live piece of assessment. I didn't want it to go drastically wrong and have to re-examine them. So I only put a small part of it as pairwise, but the results looks pretty good. It was a summative quiz, and it added up to 10% of the total class marks, so it was relevant. I should say that we did not use the extra marking and the extra points marking for the student marks. This was a mathematical analysis I did on the results afterwards. So I didn't do the 5 marks for the 2 questions in the real test. They got 2 marks each for all the questions. But this is a mathematical examination of the post-processing the results effectively to find out what the effect was. The quiz was taken by about 200 odd students over the course of a week, and the way that the setup was, there were 6 classes in total, about 40 students each, 38, 40. They all sat the quiz electronically, and it was under exam conditions, not allowing to use internet, etc., etc. There were invigilators through graduate teaching assistants in the room. The access to the quiz was controlled via password, which was different for every class. Part of that was a little bit of smoke and mirrors. It was to suggest to the students that all the exams, the tests were different. Actually, they were all the same questions, but the order of the answers of question were different. So In class A or class 1, if the answer for question 1 was A, then for class 2, the answer to the same question 1 might be D. So they couldn't just swap the results like that. It was about 75 minutes long, controlled by the log-on system of the computer of Moodle, and pretty much all the students completed within the time. And that mimics the experience I had from previous years. Within the class, I took, because we got 6 classes, 3 of the classes sat the questions all in the same order. So the questions were non-shuffled, and the 5 extra questions were all at the end. For other 3 classes, I actually switched on the shuffle order within the Moodle options. So all 25 questions were randomly selected. And the students did not receive their grades until the quizzes were completed by all the classes, because you didn't want the good ones to say, these are the answers. So I went and did some number crunching, and as I say, what I did was I took the real numbers from the exam, and the maximum score for 25 questions would be 50 marks. I then processed the marks according to the pairwise methodology. So if you got both the pairwise questions right, effectively you gained an extra 5 marks. Remember, there's only 5 questions that were only benefited there, so the effect is relatively small. It wasn't a huge amount, but that was because I didn't want to break things for other reasons. We'll look at some of the examples in a second, and we'll look at the detail in a second. But first of all, this is the overall results for all 6 classes. There was no particular difference in the performance, although class number 5 seemed to score quite highly, and class number 3 and 4 seemed to score a little bit lower. But that seemed to be just the variation in the classes per se. There was no reason for them to be low or high. They were not the first or last in the exam set. So my drawing from that was there was no really significant difference in the performance between classes. There was certainly nothing that I was aware of or that I did that made a difference. Also, the shuffled and non-shuffled quizzes questions did not make a significant difference. We got roughly the same shape of curve from both. So I concluded that basically shuffling didn't make any particular difference. Non-shuffled, all the pairwise questions were right at the end. Shuffled, they would appear randomly anywhere in the thing. So let's look at one particular class. And first of all, on the top graph, the student mark gave us a mean of about 74, 75 with a standard deviation of 16%. If we went to the pairwise, we got a mean slightly lower of 72%, and the spread was pretty much the same, nothing to write home about. The standard deviation increased slightly, but nothing to, as I say, write home about. However, if I just look at the 10 pairwise questions, and obviously I knew which ones they matched out. So now the bottom graph only looks at the data where on the 10 questions. The blue mark again shows a normal marking and gives us a mean of about 71 or so odd and a standard deviation of 17. But when we go on to pairwise, the mean drops down a little, suggesting that some of them are actually failing some of the second questions. And the standard deviation increases, which is what you actually want. You want more discrimination in your students to allow to differentiate between the good students and the bad ones. And if I just get that thing there on, and obviously at the bottom end, if you didn't score very highly, then you wouldn't get any bonus marks, but it pretty much tracks all the way through. And the fact that they're spiky is indicating that in some instances, the students were actually benefiting from the pairwise methodology. And that's what we're trying to generate. So based on what I did for the 10 questions, or the 5 + 5, it does appear that using pairwise multiple choice increases the standard deviation and allows us to discriminate better between students. So the really good students obviously get them all right, but the ones who go, well, I know question 2, but it's pairwise match question 17, I'm going to guess at, it clearly was good for that. The method I adopted for marking here, which was a mathematical analysis of the exams, was that I did not introduce a penalization system for wrong answers. There is quite a lot of study on how should you mark multiple choice questions, and some people say you should mark a negative mark if you get the answer wrong, 0 for no mark for no answer, and 1 for a correct answer. A lot of people don't think that negative marking is a good thing. In theory, you could actually end up with a negative mark in your exam. So the view I've taken is you get 2 or you get an extra bonus 1. With the MCQs and the TNE students, multiple choice does appear to be a better measure of the subject understanding and not of their language skills, which is quite important. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that language skills are not important, but if I'm trying to measure engineering system design, I don't want the result to be unfairly biased because they're particularly good or negatively particularly bad at English. It doesn't seem to matter where you put the pairwise questions, though I think my gut feel is I'd inclined to want to sprinkle them around liberally. But the biggest tough one is how do you write pairwise questions as a pair, because when you write one MCQ question, it's hard enough to think about the other 4 distractors. When you write a pair, effectively you have to think about 9 distractors because you're writing them as a pair. The question is notionally the same, but flipped another way. So you need to come up with 9 different distractors. And if you're using the Moodle question bank, it doesn't quite deal with pairwise questions particularly nicely. So I think care needs to be taken when you're dealing with Moodle, trying to use pairwise matching. Thank you very much for your time, folks, and listening to that. I appreciate that this is quite a different presentation from others, but hopefully you found it interesting, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Duncan Bremner. Does anyone have any questions? You can use the raise hand button on the bottom, I think. Oh, Melanie first and Michael.
I was wondering if the students knew that this was going on, that there would be pairwise questions, and does whether or not they know, would that affect how they approach the quiz, you think?
When I set it last year, whenever it was, I can't remember, I didn't tell them because I was teaching remotely, and I thought, let's not introduce a new thing into the equation just to confuse matters. So it was all a post-process one. They may have recognized within the exam that there were two questions that were asking a similar subject, but many of the questions in the test were designed to draw out, as I say, encourage them to open the books before the exams. So they may not have spotted that they were actually deliberate pairwise, and that just I'd been a bit lazy and not dreamt up two very different questions. The other thing I was quite intrigued by was I didn't want to introduce the any more stress to them and say, oh, well, you know, how should we mark it? Should we have the negative marking one versus the 0 + 1 or +2 marking? So I thought, let's just leave it quiet. So it was very much a book study, but the results were actually quite interesting. And if I can generate the enthusiasm to write 25 pairwise questions, then I think it's a good way of doing MCQs, because if you've got big classes, and you probably need to have class sizes of bigger than probably 100 to make it worth your while. It takes about 3 or 4 days to write sufficient MCQ questions. And actually, if you can mark conventional exams in that time, then there's no benefit to you. But it does benefit the students, because it means that they don't need to rely on English.
Thank you.
Michael Dahl?
Hi. So you said that these pairwise questions make the exam more discriminatory. It increases your standard deviation. Is that desirable? Because actually, I reviewed all our assessments, and actually not in our Chinese program, but our domestic program in Edinburgh. And the MCQ exams were the most discriminating assessment we had already. And if anything, we have the problem the other way, that it's too discriminating and too many students get very low marks.
Discriminating between students is right. Let's set aside two different things. There is discrimination and there is students failing. And the two, I think, are two quite different things. I think really what you would like is to have your students quite well discriminating and ideally all passing. But you don't want, which I've seen as an external and as a reviewer of our internal marks, especially of lab work, that all the students score, 85% plus in the lab, and then they have an average of 45 or 50 in the exam. So I think we do want to get more discrimination into our exams, because we should get some more separation between the really good students, the good students, and technically the average students. And on the other side, we will have the weaker students as well. So I think we should have that. I know there is a desire to always have them passing.
I wonder if it's just a product of the different types of questions we're asking. So I'm involved in a biomedical sciences program, and we have no problem. We get loads of students getting really high marks and loads of students getting really low marks in our MCQ. So maybe it's a subject-specific thing.
I mean, do you get a reasonably normal distribution between the two, or?
Yeah, it's normal distribution, but as I say, we have this problem where if anything, sometimes it's fine, but other times we as well as getting the students with high marks, we get a lot with very low marks. So
I'm not sure if there's. I would prefer, I think, a bit more of that. I think we get. We do seem to have a slight cultural problem in dealing with our Chinese partners, is that if they score 60 or less, then they deem to have been failed the class. And in Glasgow, we'll get students down to, 40, 50. And that is not perfectly reasonable. So there may be a cultural aspect into this as well. So perhaps I am unwittingly making sure, bear in mind that I don't want to scare the students that my exam is going to be overly hard. I want to just slightly waken them up to open the books. So I don't want to demoralize them in the MCQs that I'm giving. So I would prefer they were scored slightly higher than perhaps they deserve, to encourage them to continue to study.
Thanks.
We have a comment from the chat first for John Mayer. Hong Lee asks, any problem while accessing the Moodle in China?
Not particularly, but we do have a VPN that connects directly back to the Glasgow campus for Moodle purposes. So we can't access Google, we can't access YouTube and all that good stuff, but we can access Moodle. One thing we have discovered is Moodle has got a feature called Media or Medial or something, which is for uploading videos. And I've never used it because I've been told that it doesn't work at all well in China. I upload my videos onto the Moodle site the same as I'd upload a PDF or a PowerPoint. But we've not had a huge problem with accessing Moodle, other than, if they try and all log on to Zoom and do the whiteboard with me, which didn't work.
Then John Mayer, you had a question?
Hi, yeah, I had a quick question. So one or two. So is there a particular reason why you don't use numerical input type questions and choose to only use multiple choice?
Yes, I hadn't quite learned how to do numerical input questions yet. I'm still doing battle with the Moodle quizzes. So my ignorance was probably the reason for as much as anything.
Fair enough.
Though also Glasgow only just got the formulas plugin for Moodle, which allows us to do smarter, more interesting numerical questions. So I'm also doing some battle with that.
Okay, seems fair enough. I had another quick one about there's sort of an idea that you proposed saying, if there were 4 response areas, someone guessing would have a 1 in 4 chance of getting the answer right and things like this. And typically when I've designed multiple choice questions in the past, there'll be a sort of grading of the distractors. So you've mentioned distractors at this point, but typically I'll have some distractors that are obviously wrong. So anyone who had any notion of the course would know that they weren't the correct answer, but maybe there'd be one distractor that was very close to the correct answer. And sort of so most students, I'd assume in the class, they'll be able to rule out 1 or 2 of the multiple choices quite easily. And then it comes down to guessing between 1 or 2 things. I'm not sure how this is formulated into a question, but how do you think this relates to sort of the analysis you were putting forward at the start of the talk?
I understand what you mean. I'm not as kind as you. All my distractors are plausibly close values. And some of them are things like you need to calculate out the gain. And if you combine the resistors, whatever, in the wrong fashion, you will get a number that I've given you. So you need to know what the formula was to get the right number. But I know what you mean. You can get the ridiculous silly ones of, which are easy to discount, but my ones, no, I try to make them all 4. You can see if you knit the numbers together, you could get each one of them. So you need to know how to work out the answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know what you mean. The only last thing I'd say is add a small comment to say, so I know roughly what you can do in Moodle, but I'm not that familiar with it in terms of running class tests. I know there's a guy at Edinburgh called Chris Sanguin who developed Stack, which is excellent for running computer-aided assessment. and it's open source and freely available. And it can link up with Moodle, I believe. And I'm more familiar with another system that we use at the University of Birmingham, but yeah, I can say that Stacks, you can get access to it quite easily. And there is the world expert who's not that far away in Edinburgh. I think they've got loads of pre-written engineering content as well and mathematics content.
Oh, okay, right. I shall
they've
dive into that and see what it's got, because the biggest challenge is writing the silly questions, and really it should be a team effort. Yeah,
I think they've been at this for years. Yeah, they've taken some sort of core engineering textbooks and sort of developed almost all of the questions within those textbooks into Stack questions. So they've got a huge bank of stuff that they.
And it's Chris Sanguine, is it?
Yep, I'll into the chat. And, the system is called Stack. That's about all I had to input. So.
Oh, great! I'll have a look at that. I wasn't aware of that.
There's some questions in the chat too.
I think, do you think you'd continue to keep the idea of pairwise from the students? No, I think I'd. Now that it seems to work, I think I'd declare to the students and say, look, here's your test, and I'd explain the marking. Because I would have to explain them, because if they're getting 5 marks for answering 2 questions, then I have to tell them why they're getting 5 marks. I wouldn't tell them how the pair was matched, and that's up to them to discover that. But I think it's only right that I should do that. But as I say, I didn't get the students didn't benefit or were not hurt out by my analysis. But if I was to do it for real, then I would have to tell them why they're getting extra marks. Was there something else in there?
Holly had one on which VPN you use to access the Moodle access.
I don't know, because it's not. It's dealt with by IT services. So effectively, IT have established it's actually a virtual channel rather than a VPN, but they actually then established a virtual channel between Glasgow and UESTC IT services. And all it gets you is effectively onto the campus in Glasgow here, and access things like Moodle and Turnitin and all that other joyous stuff. So it's not a conventional VPN that you and I could buy, because it's questionable whether you should be using VPNs in China at all. It's a question I keep on asking my management, and they keep on refusing to answer. Which means that I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is, but they don't want to say it.
Life is not good. Going back to like Stack and writing mathematical questions for multiple choice or input questions. Have you ever heard of Prairieland? So there's another campus on our campus in ZJE, which is UIUC, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I don't know if you heard of it, but they have their own software, open source software called Prairieland, and it's built entirely for the engineering, their engineering program. So maybe that's something you can look into also.
Okay. I must declare that as an industrialist, I hate open source software with a passion.
Why is that?
Because there's no support for it. And Moodle,
but this one,
Moodle's a perfect example. It gets done when people have time to do it rather than as a product. But I realize that some of these things are open source because they're research projects, etc.
So for Prairieland, though, they use it for their entire engineering department. So they have a support system for it.
Okay, good.
I was working with them before on it, and they're decently quick about turnaround.
No, I don't want that. I wouldn't want to malign the Moodle support team that's there, but the problem is that in Glasgow we actually have very poor local Moodle support, so I have to go to Moodle.org to get answers, which is not ideal. Anyway, enough of griping about Glasgow.
Well, it looks like Pip has another question.
I just want to, to get enthusiastic about open. I'm afraid I disagree with your view of open. I think open's actually really important, and the community that drives. There's loads of Moodle communities that solve loads of the problems, and it's more, it's about passion and about a starting point, and there's loads about open that's really exciting. And I think check out the OER Open Education Resources Conference, Domains 2021, that's happening actually this week. It's live this week, the conference led by the Association of Learning Technology. There's so much more to open. I can't, I'm quite passionate about. I'm afraid I really have to disagree with your view of open there. And I think open can really support transnational education as well, in terms of the community actually driving the improvement and solving the problems. The Joint Institute is a community, and we're doing this voluntarily. We're not, been asked to do this. We're driving the change and the improvement and solving the problems together.
Pip, I understand that you're very passionate about it. My views come from having spent a lot of time in dealing with semiconductor design, which did start as an open source product from University of Berkeley predominantly, and eventually, and many companies were doing their own thing internally based on the open source, and eventually they all migrated onto commercially available platforms from people like Cadence and Synopsys and things, because they're required to have that quality of service. So it's, different strokes for different folks, I think. But my experience of open is that it kind of works, sort of, but no one's getting paid to make sure it always works. That's the issue I kind of got. It's great for pushing boundaries. It's less good for building a reliable machine.
It looks like John Mayer says in the chat that I will say, though, that Stack is very well supported via the community, probably better than Mobius from my experience.
Mobius, do you mean Moodle or?
I'm not quite sure. Oh, John said they use
I can say, it's easier. So Mobius is another computer-aided assessment system that I have some familiarity with using. And
I see. Okay.
Not open source. It is in principle supported, but from my experience of seeing both, probably Stack is actually better supported than Mobius, despite it being open source, and Mobius not being open source. It's also Stack is also far more customizable, so you can pretty much do what you like with it. Clarify, these are full computer-aided assessment systems. So, if you wanted to really assess someone's ability to code, you could probably do it in these systems if you really pushed it. But they're sort of designed for, entry-level mathematics, engineering programs. That's really what they're designed for, and asking questions about these sort of topics.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Pip, you still have your hand up? Or James Murrah 19. I'm sorry, I don't know your name there.
Hi, Christine, it's Joanne. Sorry, I didn't realize I had that up as my name at the moment. I apologize, Duncan, you may have actually said, and I wasn't playing scary birds or anything, I was paying attention, but I think lockdown has destroyed my short-term memory. With the bonus marking, how do you use those marks to take forward for the students? Is it summative? So the reason why I'm asking is, sorry.
The bonus marking was purely a study on my Excel spreadsheets. So they didn't count. So the maximum score the student could get was 50.
Okay.
But when I post-processed them, I could get a maximum score of 50 would convert into 55 in my spreadsheet, if that makes sense.
Yes, it
But
does.
no, the students never ever saw the extra bonus marks.
Right. I'm just relieved to hear that. I once taught at a medical school where one of my students got 120%, but at the end of the day, her mark was 100%, and it seemed inherently unfair to me that there was a group of students who'd outperformed their colleagues but didn't see that at the end of the day in their marks.
No, I want to make sure that. Also, as I say, it was a live assessment, so I didn't want to change things too much in case it went really, really wrong. That's why I only put in 5 pairwise questions, because if it didn't work or had done weird things, then I would have had to re-examine the whole class.
Fair enough. Very interesting. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, then looks like everyone is done. Thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Bremner. And we will have our next session on the 26th, I believe. Thank you so much again for all the speakers today. It was very interesting, very informative. I hope we all learn from each other. Oh, John Mayer says Mobius is a computer-aided assessment. But yes, so thank you again, and we'll see you all next week. Well, at least we hope we will. Take care then.